Hello, onlookers. Today I have placed before me the task of covering Galadriel's character and to comment on her portrayal in Amazon's upcoming TV show. There are many fine details and pieces of evidence surrounding Galadriel's character, despite also being very sparse relative to some other figures. Even so, I will only be bringing up those points which are the most relevant and hard-hitting in my estimation. The first commandment here on this channel is, "Thou shalt not be intellectually dishonest." The purpose of this channel is to meticulously discuss the subject matter according to some consistent set of principles from which I can produce valid arguments. And I ask everyone here to not let our commitments to one position be so strong that they cannot be wavered by any evidence. So, can good old Nerwen fight? From the last version of the story, in the Unfinished Tales, there is this quote. She, with Celeborn, fought heroically in the defense of Alqualondë against the assault of the Noldor. There we go. Case closed. We win. Doesn't that feel good? The possibilities are endless. Hey, I've got this great idea. Just hear me out. So, my girl Galadriel has this companion armed with a sword, and I was thinking she could jump. But of course, that would be to ignore what is quite a big topic about the portrayal of Galadriel. Therefore, let us stride forth past the easily discarded arguments, poor quality, and really discuss the issue. What even is a warrior? The great Professor Tolkien is described as being an author and a linguist, and for some time he was a soldier in World War I, beginning his service in 1915. But despite having served as a soldier, no one really says that's what he was, if you see what I mean. Language can be vague. Because of that, I propose we try to track some metrics that we really care about. And so here, I'm going to lay out what I think should be considered warrior-making properties, if you will. Being a warrior, or any other term that generally describes an occupation, like writer or linguist, consists of being first, a professionally trained armed fighter. Second, it is your career path. You can be a warrior and then later on not be a warrior. But most of all, it consists of a necessary motivation to be one. Here's an example with Tolkien being a linguist. The field of linguistics interested him, he was motivated to enter it, and he made contributions to it, such as his translation of Beowulf. Generally, when we want to find out what kind of person someone is, what we are trying to learn about them is these motivations and values, and their personality traits too, of course. Someone's occupation might tell you some of that information, especially with the helpful use of stereotypes. And then we ask clarifying questions. Why did you join the army? How did you get into finance? From what I've said here, you might already have an inkling of what my argument will be going forward, but there's a lot more to cover before that. A quick talk about the Noldorin royalty as a whole. How do we conceive of the Noldorin royal family? That's all of them, by the way, from Fëanor to Gil-galad. Their primary role is usually a leadership role, specifically political leaders. After that, they might be commanders or generals in battle. In medieval warfare, the political leader would sometimes fight in major battles, sometimes they would fight at the very front, and sometimes they led from behind. Fëanor leads from the very front, but is killed in the very first battle. The closest person to a full-on warrior, as his third role, was probably Fingolfin. He seems to have had enough practice fighting to keep up with Morgoth, dodging and withstanding attacks for some time, before he loses his footing and is killed. Elrond is a commander in the Second Age, but in the Third Age he takes on a primarily political role, with Glorfindel as the commander of his armies. The last thing I want to bring up here is the question, what do you picture in your mind when you think of these characters? In my mind, they are always these great, majestic elves that carry themselves with a sense of dignity and nobility. Even in his most arrogant and rash or brash moments, such as refusing to give the Silmarils to the Valar, or pursuing Morgoth against the will of the Valar, or burning the ships of the Teleri, I never imagined Fëanor as some moody teenager. Everything he did, I picture him doing with an air of grandeur and a sense of purpose. Portraying any of these people as some kind of moody teenager just because they have character flaws like pride is clearly absurd. I doubt Amazon would do something as silly as that. But if we do think that that portrayal is absurd, then it should follow the closer you come to that portrayal, the worse it is. That's why it's worrisome when the show releases descriptions like brash or filled with piss and vinegar. I can't even imagine Fëanor filled with piss and vinegar, and he's the most scummy of the lot. Wow, Cerebrum, great work. You defined everyone out of being a quote-unquote warrior and replaced it with the term commander. Well, that's what Galadriel is in the show after all. You could have just said that at the beginning, instead of trudging through a wasteland of semantics. First up, the things I discussed will come up later, specifically character motivation. And second, getting Galadriel to be a commander from the text is actually not that easy at all. The closest we can get is that Galadriel ruled over a group in Eregion, and that group fought in the defense of Eregion. It is also stated that she took part in that defense together with Celeborn. For the record, a similar situation also existed when the host of Fingolfin first entered Middle-earth after crossing the Helcaraxi. From the outset, people want to claim a bias in any interpretation that doesn't have Galadriel being a commander. It seems fair. We all have mental models of the world, and we make inferences all the time. Sometimes these models are biased along some characteristic or other. Would we immediately assume Galadriel commanded her soldiers if she was a male instead? If an adaptation had the now him commanding armies, no one would make a fuss. However, there are reasons to disagree with this whole argument. Firstly, there are many cases when the political leader who is a male doesn't command his own armies. Secondly, that bias might even be justified. In Middle-earth, war isn't the role of women. Women are less effective in medieval warfare. A 50% female army is likely to lose to a 100% male army. Galadriel is a bit unique in this regard though, and technically being a commander is different to actually fighting. The last point is, there isn't some strong reason to make the inference anyway. My internal model of the world says if someone is thirsty, and there's some water in front of them, they will drink that water pretty soon. But there isn't the same kind of strong reason to believe a political leader is commanding their army. Especially since Tolkien could very easily have had her doing that. It only takes one line. He explicitly mentioned Celeborn being a commander. He just had to add the name Galadriel beside his. If she had been explicitly said to be a commander sometime in the past, then it would be a natural inference, but she isn't, and that's my final verdict. There isn't a reason to think Galadriel led armies. You could definitely headcanon it would fit right there, but there isn't any real evidence for it. Okay, now, really, who is Galadriel? Where should we look to find out Galadriel's core motivations and values? There are a few instances that I think are relevant. When the Noldor first set out for Middle-earth, we are given one of her primary motivations: to rule a realm of her own. This is supported many times as she rules over her people in Lindon under the ultimate rule of Gil-galad, and then leads them to the Lake Evendim before going to Eregion and ruling there for a time, before Celebrimbor takes over. Finally, in the late Third Age, she gains full political control of Lothlorien. The desire for political power sticks out very strongly as one of the defining traits of Galadriel. Next up, we have her love of the nature that surrounds her. We are told that she approaches Celebrimbor asking him for a way to preserve the nature in her lands because it grieves her to see it die out and fade away. Again, from all the information about her moving around from place to place, and excluding information about her from the Third Age, this kind of sticks out. Thematically, I would bring up Tolkien's statement about Galadriel being the Mother Mary figure of Middle-earth, but I worry this point is too easily shot down by pointing out she could be different at different stages of her life. What have we seen from the show so far? The picture of Galadriel manspreading got a lot of backlash, mostly I think because it's the polar opposite of nobility, dignity, grace, or any sense of grandeur. It is only marketing, but the worry is it will translate into the show. So far, from clips and trailer footage, they are trying to portray her with the four aforementioned qualities, and so the remaining worry for me is that she might instead come off as pretentious, and the acting might be over the top and cringy. In terms of character, I think we've seen the focus put way too much in superficial things like Galadriel fighting or being on a horse. In this section, I would like to talk about what the focus really should be and what the show should avoid. Galadriel's desire for political power should feature heavily and be one of her defining character traits. You have to show that on screen. If all the show focuses on is her swishing her sword around, killing orcs with absolutely top-notch camera work and sound quality, it will have failed to distinguish her from any old military commander. It will miss out what's interesting and canon about her character, and it will be pretty shallow too. Her desire to protect nature should feature too. I'm not sure how or where, but it should be there. The show should avoid having her come across a bit cringy. It should avoid the moody teenager portrayal, and it should steer clear of the kind of meta girls get it done statements. I want to make a separate video on the meta discussion, showrunners, the Half-Foot Hobbit fiasco, etc. I try to avoid it in videos like these, but when a statement breaks immersion by directly referencing our world, instead of just being a parallel in concept, it's bad. I don't think I need to justify that. This isn't a political satire show. Finally, we come to the plot. Here, it's such an egregious change from the canon, I can't actually believe it. Galadriel never went to Númenor, and the what-if story that could have her be there certainly can't look like the one in the show. Númenor is aware of Sauron for more than 3/4 of its existence. In the middle years of Númenor's existence, they absolutely thrashed Sauron at the Battle of the Gwathlo. They single-handedly turned the tide of the War of the Elves and Sauron. In late-stage Númenor, they fought Sauron for hundreds of years over their settlements and colonies. Even in Tar Palantir's reign, Ar-Pharazôn spent his early life fighting Sauron and his forces, all the way until he returns to Númenor to rebel against Palantir up until the king's death in 3255 of the Second Age. In early Númenor, they are alerted of a servant of Morgoth in the east by Gil-galad, and they begin to prepare for a confrontation with him as early as the year 800. Galadriel going to Númenor and recruiting an army to go fight a newly discovered Sauron just doesn't fit in anywhere, and it feels incredibly jarring to me. And Gil-galad doesn't understand the danger. He fobs off Galadriel, does he? I cannot understand these decisions, and I'm sure it will take a few essays to convince me that any of this is okay. I doubt I ever will be convinced. I literally cannot come up with a way for this to make sense from an adaptation point of view. I'm planning to make future videos, one on Galadriel, one on the messy discussion about showrunners, politics and all that, and a video on Númenor. I've also seen more people than I expected saying that Peter Jackson's films are just as bad adaptations as The Rings of Power, which is crazy to me. I've definitely seen Tolkien purists saying the opposite. My standards are lower than a purist, but I can't see anything faithful so far about the show. Maybe it's unfair because Rings of Power has more to invent, and Peter Jackson didn't have to invent a single thing. But in any case, in order to avoid any hypocrisy on my part, I'm going to reread the books with the same frame of mind I'm going to watch the show, and then make some videos about Peter Jackson's films in the same vein as this one. If you think these videos are interesting, perhaps influencing how you think about the topics I've covered, and you're interested in hearing more of what I have to say, please consider subscribing and please leave a like. For more of my thoughts on criticizing the Rings of Power, have a look at my video titled Amazon's Finland. And now, goodbye and farewell, everyone.